Everyone. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind palace gates like never before. This is where tradition meets truth and nothing is off limits. This week, helping me tackle the biggest headlines are world-renowned royal authors Hugo Vickers and Sally Bedell Smith. Thank you so much. I was just telling you off air, you're my A team. So I'm so grateful to have you back on such an important week. We saw the most gorgeous displays. Does anyone do it as wonderful, as beautiful, as big as London does when it comes to some of and the royal family when it comes to some of these celebrations and honoring the fallen, all honoring these people of service in general? Hugo, talk to me about what we saw with VE Day this week. We actually saw the Princess of Wales today in a beautiful polka dot dress at Westminster. It's just so nice to see everyone looking strong, healthy, and united.
It certainly is. And I mean, they did a very good job. And the Westminster Abbey service was splendid. And of course, it's always interesting to see how each king moves things on, because on this occasion, we had the royal family pausing to talk to the veterans as they left the Abbey. They'd selected certain people, and they are wonderful. The ones that have survived, they're so articulate, and they all look about 70, and they're all about 100. I mean, they have to be, so that was amazing. And I think that was all extremely well done. And you've got the marvelous fanfares and the music and the readings, things. Yeah, we do it pretty well. It's the one thing that we are really, really good at. And the reason it's so good is because it is rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed.
Well, Sally, one thing they can't rehearse for is Prince Louis. He is so sweet and so full of life. I just love, we hear a lot of negativity in the United States from a couple in the United States about this prison that the royal family is. And you look at Prince Louis, and he is a child that is full of love, carefree, and bliss. Isn't it so sweet to see just how much his family, the freedom his family has given him to be himself?
Well, you're absolutely right. As I watch that, I can't help thinking of what the Meghan and Harry have lost, and William and Kate are indeed able to bring up those three children in a relatively normal way. Obviously, they have a lot of protection, but it's very subtle. And they can go up to Norfolk and spend several weeks up there and go across the golf course and go to their little cabin on the beach, and nobody bothers them. And they can go to the harbor and jump around the boats. And they're allowed to have a real childhood, which I think in many ways is very different from the childhood that Meghan and Harry's children are now experiencing, which is, I don't know, part of some sort of production.
It's true. It's unfortunately true. All right. Wait, Hugo, were you at Westminster today?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't, but I was very interested in what Sally was saying. And of course, the wonderful thing is that we actually see the children face onwards. We actually can see their faces, which actually, fun enough, we aren't allowed to do with the Montecito bunch. I've actually met Prince Louis because once I was at Kensington Palace, and Catherine was skipping with Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis came running over. This was 2 or 3 years ago, and he said, "Good morning, sir." And I thought, hang on a minute, I ought to be calling you sir, probably.
Oh, I love that story. That is so sweet. Well, Sally, I wanted to ask you, you have an amazing Substack called Royals Extra, and you talk about this monument to the Queen. You're very passionate about it. Can you explain to some viewers that maybe might not be as familiar with this, what is going on and why you're so passionate about it?
Well, I think we need to memorialize the longest serving and really quite most remarkable monarch in British history. I lapse into our, sorry, because I write so much about them. But I think, and I've been waiting to see, and I got some hints last month when I talked to a few people. So I wrote something then, and I walked around the Marlborough Gate on the Mall, which is, the focal point of it. And then yesterday, the five finalists were, their proposals were released. And so, and they're all fascinating and quite imaginative. But I just couldn't help but think that the one by the revered 89-year-old architect Norman Foster, the Baron Foster of Thames, it's so beautiful and elegant. It features not only an equestrian statue of the Queen right there at the Marlborough Gate, right on the Mall when the parades can come by and salute her. And then the ingenious part is at the other side of St. James's Palace. He proposes setting up a Prince Philip gate and then having a statue of the two of them standing side by side. And then between that, there are all sorts of imaginative gardens. So I don't see how anybody could say no to that one.
Hugo, I love the idea of honoring Prince Philip as well, who was such an incredible support and always had his head on straight. He just was so common sense. He was, I think, a really great addition to, I mean, he didn't get the title he wanted, but he was such a great addition to the powerful team that surrounded the Queen and helped things run so smoothly.
In a way, it's the only time she really stepped out of line and did something completely unexpected because her mother was very keen to marry her off to a Grenadier Guards officer and put a number of Grenadier Guards officers in her wake. That didn't happen. Actually, he couldn't care less about titles, by the way. He wasn't in the slightest bit interested in those, and they had to persuade him every single time to accept anything at all. It was always a big battle. He wasn't interested in that. He was, of course, an enormously wonderful support. And I mean, it's so interesting, you know, but what that marriage must have been like because he was always sort of, you know, have you thought about doing it this way? Why are you doing it like that? Why you've got to think he liked to argue about everything because if you argue about things, you come to a consensus and agreement. And you could win an argument with him, but you had to argue. He didn't like people who just sort of meekly just sort of said, oh yes. So he, you know, he was quite a powerful force around the place and he was always full of ideas. And I think that if he was sometimes, and he was quite often, impatient, it was simply because he realized that even if you live to be nearly 100, there's so little time to get it all done.
Well, unfortunately, what you just said has reminded me of something else Sally wrote on her Substack. And I'm sorry to go here so soon in the conversation. But Sally, she says on her Royals Extra Substack under the It's All About Meghan story. Sally, you write, Harry may no longer be Prince William's spare, but he seems increasingly to be playing the same role with Meghan, co-signed to walking two steps behind her, making cameo appearances in her ventures. Sally, Prince Philip seemed to contribute. I feel like we saw so much of what Prince Philip contributed. Yeah. I don't think we see that with Prince Harry. He does just seem to be this spare, or some said he looked like her bodyguard in New York. Does he realize, do you think he sees it as clearly as we do?
I can't read his mind, but I think he just judging, and I hate to, judging by the expression on his face, which is also, which is almost always one of anxiety. You could see that in his interview. It was a combination of anxiety and kind of a suppressed rage. But in the case of Prince Philip, he had a role, he had a purpose. He was committed to public service in a very, not a sporadic way like Harry is, but he was there every day. And if he wasn't doing something to support the Queen, he was doing something imaginative on his own. He had so many charities and so many causes. Harry has the Invictus Games, very laudable. But beyond that, he has a few mental health initiatives and he pops up from time to time. But I was really struck by what he said in his interview, that he was committed to public service, but we really haven't seen much evidence of that.
35 years, Hugo. He says that he committed 35 years of service. I've given 35 years of service to this country, 2 tours of Afghanistan. He said, my status hasn't changed. It can't change. I am who I am. I am part of what I'm part of, and I can never escape that. My circumstances will always be the same. I don't know who taught this young man math, but he's only 40 years old. 35 is quite a long time to be living a life of service. I understand what he's trying to say, but he has to realize, to me, it seems so ridiculous. You can go off and live in a, in the middle of nowhere and nobody's going to bother you. Harry and Meghan have pursued a life that attracts media and photographers, and Meghan's walking red carpets and in expensive dresses. And then she's trying to sell those dresses online. His actions rarely match his words.
Well, I mean, let's look at the Duke of Windsor, who certainly served his country for a long time, and he was actually king. The moment that he left, he got no further security from Scotland Yard, and nor did he expect it. He had to look after himself. I mean, he may not have been very happy about the way he lived, but on the other hand, he certainly wasn't, whinging about that. He was whining about other things, but not that, not security. There's absolutely no reason why we should pay for the sort of security that Prince Harry thinks he has, because he's not a working member of the royal family. He's contributing nothing to this country, and the taxpayer shouldn't have to pay for it. If he comes over for something like a jubilee or a royal funeral, he's protected within the security cordon that all the others are protected in. And of course, don't misunderstand this. If there was any real danger, the security services will be watching, and they would provide it on a one-to-one basis if they felt it was necessary. So he's perfectly happy to go to Colombia, which we Brits are told not to go to because it's so dangerous. But he thinks he can't come to this country. Well, actually, he does come to this country, of course, but it doesn't stop him either. It's very contradictory, the whole thing.
Well, Sally, that is something that we
Yeah.
should point out, because I think in America, I don't know how many headlines you've seen, but in the States, the headline was primarily Prince Harry's been stripped of his security. So every time I went on, I had to repeat the same thing. He's not been stripped of his security. He just has to give 28 days notice. And for some reason, that's upsetting to him that he has to. I call my parents if I'm on the way and say, I just want to give you a heads up that I need you to clear out the guest room. But he does not, apparently, it's inconvenient to him apparently to give this 28 days notice. He also mentioned, which I had just assumed, that it's based on what his plan is while he's there. So if they want to come over to Christmas shop, you might not get the full, everybody packing heat while you walk up and down, Kensington. I don't know. But if you are coming to do something of real value to, champion a UK charity or to support the king, you are likely to get the security that you're asking for. Is he that savvy that he knows that the headlines in certain places are just going to be like, he's been abandoned?
Well, I'm sure he hopes so. He wants the public to be on his side. But the idea that he has to give 28 days notice actually, in a way, sort of plays into what he is arguing, because presumably they need notice to do the proper risk assessment. In his interview, he made a big deal of how he has been denied the risk assessment board since 2019, and that they dropped him from the highest risk to the lowest risk, and they basically cut him loose, which is not true. They're very professional, and if he's going over there, even for something at a lower level than a big event, they're going to do an assessment, and it takes time. They have to check with their intelligence sources. So I think he's just being so unreasonable and expecting 24/7 all the time, whenever on a whim he wants to come over. And I don't think he understands that at all.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Now, Prince Harry acknowledged that his family has faced so many disagreements over the years, but said the only thing that's left is the ongoing dispute over his security, an issue he described as the long-standing sticking point. He added, I don't know how much time my father has left. He refuses to speak to me because of the security situation, but I'd still like to reconcile. That was another, in the States, that was another big headline. I want to reconcile. I'm like, these people didn't watch all 30 minutes of the interview. That was like the one thing I don't even like. That's the one line that I was like, I don't think he means that. Oh, how rude and unnecessary to say that line about your father. I don't just, to me, it must not be common sense, must not be very common, because people will interpret that as the worst.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, his father earlier in the week had given a reception for cancer victims, and he had said exactly what he wanted to say about to them, and that was all fine. So you can imagine how unwelcome Prince Harry's intervention was. And if he isn't speaking to his father, where does he get this information from? I mean, it's probably not even trustworthy, and he certainly had absolutely no right to start giving the world a bulletin about his father's health coming from him. Actually, I mean, as we know, the palace rather unusually put forward a so-called anonymous speaker. I didn't think it takes me very long to work out who that was, but anyway, this person speaking on the grounds of anonymity to sort of contradict a lot of what he said and say that, in future they can't say anything to him because he leaks like a sieve. I mean, and that's what he does, and that was the same actually, which they said about Diana. Sally will remember this probably, that Prince Philip wrote these letters. I saw them at Buckingham Palace once, and in which he said the trouble is that every time Charles tries to speak to you, the next day it all appears in the Daily Mail. It didn't help when they were negotiating the time when they were separating. They were in 1992 when it was all getting difficult, the time of the Morton book.
Sally,
So,
could you go
Well,
ahead?
yeah, I think Hugo touched on a really fundamental issue, which is trust. And they simply do not trust Harry to keep a confidence. They certainly don't trust Meghan. I mean, I was thinking as I was listening to him, I was thinking about the episode in Harry and Meghan where there was a video or a still photo of the garden entrance at Buckingham Palace. Hugo knows this well, on the north side of Buckingham Palace, which is the family entrance. Nobody else uses it, and nobody is allowed to take a photograph of it. And there was Meghan with her camera crew taking pictures of the garden entrance, which then appeared in Harry and Meghan, the Netflix series. And I thought, she was doing a lot of that when they were over there for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And that's a kind of vivid example of how they can't trust them. But even beyond that, I think when they were doing the Sandringham Summit in 2020, they were very worried about having Meghan on the line listening because, quite frankly, they were not convinced that she might not be recording it. And if you can't trust people at that level, it makes it very difficult for you to take them back and into the great embrace of the family.
That when you started to tell the story, I wondered if you were going to talk about the text message, because there are so many examples we can give. Prince Harry receives a text message from Prince William, and he shoves the phone in Meghan's face, and she reacts, and then she starts like typing, furiously, and he's looking at the text message, and they're kind of being vague about it back and forth, but you're just thinking, oh my goodness, we should not be seeing this.
Yeah.
And then the fury when she finds out that Jason Knopf has given the court information again that's going to hurt her, and she's mad because Prince William has clearly given him the permission, Jason the permission to, work somehow against her. It's The evidence is overwhelming when it comes to these two, the private text messages between Catherine and Meghan inside the book Spare. It's all very appalling. I want to ask both of you about this. Harry claims in this interview that he alleges that the change in his security status in 2020 was used as leverage against him following his decision to step back as a senior working royal. He deems the removal of his protection, which deemed the removal of his protection lawful, he's upset with, saying it sets a new precedent that security can be weaponized as a means of control. I want to ask a couple of things. So I'd say leverage or consequences. He has previously made statements about how he's also doing this for William's children. Hugo, how infuriating must that be for the Wales family to hear Harry say he's doing this for his nieces and nephews? I don't even think he knows Prince Louis at this point. And you know, you're saying your family was in a prison, or certain members of your family are in this prison situation, yet you give your children titles. You want your children
Well,
to be in the same prison?
it's so ridiculous, the whole thing, and I just wonder what's going to happen when those children grow up a little bit and they realize that they haven't been allowed to see either of their grandparents. They're not going to like it very much. I mean, it's going to be a rather a difficult situation, I think. And then the other question I ask myself, of course, is what about schools? I mean, because I read terrible things about things that happen in schools in your country. Over here, on the whole, bad things happen in schools here too, but not nearly as bad. We don't have the guns in the same way and that sort of thing. So, essentially, the Wales children are very well protected at the school that they go to, and they go to other schools and they play matches and things, and the parents are always told, just be very discreet, and they are very discreet, and it all works extremely well. I just wonder how that's going to play out. Not so well, I don't think.
Yeah, and Sally, when
Yeah.
he talks about wanting to protect Prince William's children from this prison, this leverage that the palace uses with security, is it inching towards him talking about his father's health without his permission? Is it almost like this is not your lane, stay in your lane?
Yeah, I mean, it's really presumptuous of him to say that he's trying to protect William and Kate's children. If Harry and Meghan had chosen to remain in the UK and live in Frogmore Cottage nearby, their cousins and coming under the same blanket protection that the Wales family has, I would think the children would be much better off. They would know their family, which is really their only family. Meghan has not introduced Harry to her father, nor has he introduced her father to his grandchildren. So that's all they've got. And Harry and Meghan are preventing them really from seeing them, um, by virtue of what they did in 2020, and now by making statements like, well, it's impossible for us. Harry is the master of the passive aggressive statement, like, I'm so sorry you feel that way. And, well, I've forgiven you for not forgiving me, and I think it just shows a kind of detachment from reality in so many things that he says.
Oh, wow. I couldn't agree with you more. Hugo, Prince Harry says his jaw hit the floor when he learned a representative of the royal household sits on the Ravic committee, and claimed that it allowed them to exercise influence over what security members of the royal family get. He claims, I have had it described to me once people knew about the facts that this is a good old fashioned establishment stitch up. And that's what it feels like. We know of one of the people on the Ravic committee that he works for King Charles, but there's this other mystery member, and it feels like Prince Harry's teasing at something. Like Sally said, it's a bit of a passive aggressive, but it's also that flirtatious thing they do with us. There's a royal racist, but we're not going to tell you who it is. They give us just an inch instead of telling us. I don't know if the point is because he's preparing to write another book where he's going to unleash everything and he's just teasing everything. But did you get the sense that he was saying somebody on that committee has it out for him?
Well, he's saying lots of things like that, but it's all more of the same, to be quite honest. And if you actually listen to the judgment, Sir Geoffrey de Vos, who was extremely polite and actually recognized, he saw where Prince Harry was coming from and said, look, I see what you're trying to say. But, then he had to look at the law and absolutely understand that it was not possible to change the verdict, which had already been given out. I suspect probably Prince Harry, like so many people, fell into the hands of lawyers who kept saying, "Oh, come on, let's take it a step further. You can win." You know, that's what lawyers, I'm afraid, do tend to do rather. And seems to we hear the figure of 1.5 million pounds on this case. That's an awful lot of money. He could have bought himself a lot of security for that, or he could have done a lot of good for his children with that. I mean, he could have put it to much better use, or indeed he could have given it to one of his charities. That would have been very nice instead of wasting all this money. But so I really think it's just more of the same, quite honestly. I mean, he's now going to say that he's going to go and try and complain to the Prime Minister or to Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, and things like that. You know, I mean, it's just goes on and on and on. He just needs to be. You have to accept a verdict like that. It's been discussed openly and very widely and taken up a lot of people's time and energy. It's over, finished.
That's right. Sally, I want to ask you about how he came in with such a punch, and this is exactly what he wanted to have all of the headlines. Oh, poor Prince Harry, he loses his security. But we later hear from the BBC that they do feel like they should have challenged his statements and
Yeah.
that they might have made a mistake editorially by just allowing him to unleash and unload without reading the statement from Buckingham Palace, which was, very clear and saying, look, this has been litigated, this has been looked over multiple times. Everyone came to the same conclusion. Uh, are you surprised with the BBC? Because after I sat back and watched it, I thought to myself, this isn't what I expect when it comes to BBC material.
Yeah, I mean, when he started the interview, I thought, well, wait a minute, we've just recently, I mean, like within an hour or whatever, gotten this judgment. And I thought, oh well, he's being impulsive. But as the interview went on, I realized he had very carefully planned what he was going to say. And it was very intentional. He clearly worked it up with his lawyers. And I couldn't help thinking, although the circumstances were very different, how carefully Diana planned her panorama interview, even to the extent of getting questions in advance and rehearsing them and all that. I'm not saying the BBC did that, but I think the BBC was so pleased to have the opportunity to get the first crack at Harry that they were sort of inert. They didn't challenge him on anything. And I suppose if they'd done that, it would have been a much shorter interview. But he commanded it from the minute, from the very first.
Hugo, he licked his lips 150 times. I talked to a body language expert that was like, he stuck his tongue out 150 times. Obviously, he needs to start watching himself in the mirror like Princess Diana did, because that was a little off-putting. Can I ask you, you said to page 6, Harry wrote in Spare how the king told him, don't make my last years miserable. And yet he's done exactly that. Can we discuss that? Because you're absolutely right. I forgot about that line. And it's right on the tails of making Prince Philip's last few months on this earth a misery, and Queen Elizabeth, who, worked up until the very last minute. She was still living that life of service. And Harry and Meghan show up in the UK so they can get another trophy. Didn't even bother to see her. It's devastating because King Charles truly has lived a life of service, and to me seems like he has a very soft, sweet heart.
I think he's a very compassionate man, and I still think that he's left the door open. He has never responded to any of these jibes that have come from Prince Harry in any way at all. We have no public statements from him at all, So I think he's left the door open, and of course, I'm sure that as a father, he would be keen to reconcile with his son if he could. But if it's a question of that he won't take the calls and things, the reason for that, I'm sure, and I'm fairly certain, would be because he doesn't want to get a barrage of sort of me complaints the whole time and sort of accusations and things when he's got a lot of other things on his mind. And basically, I think,
Cancer. Yeah, cancer.
yeah, exactly, and just leave him to, if he can sort of sort himself out and come in with a sincere apology and quietly behind the scenes and not on the BBC, talking openly to everybody else, then there's a possibility. But no, I mean, I think it's absolutely true. the Oprah Winfrey interview was actually broadcast while Prince Philip was in the last days of his life. He just, in hospital and everything. That was outrageous. I do happen to know that the Queen always used to make sure that she had somebody with her whenever she saw those two, for the reasons that we've been talking about, that they might be taking photographs or, I don't know, recording or anything they might be doing, and she was, very upset by the whole thing. And that's what I really find unforgivable. That, I mean, I'm a great admirer of the Queen, and I think she had a fantastic reign, as Sally was saying earlier on. She should have been just floating into sort of sunlit uplands and sort of the glory of the Platinum Jubilee. And she had all these awful problems, and this was one of the biggest ones that she had to deal with. It's absolutely dreadful.
I think that's why the public, I mean, I'm speaking for the people I talk to in the States. There is a lot of resentment that there is so much selfishness when it comes to these two. Yeah. And you talk about the me. Prince Harry says it during the Oprah interview. My father has stopped taking my calls. And it was later reported, sources close to the palace said, the king said to, he was the prince at the time, said to Queen Elizabeth, I'm not an ATM. He keeps calling me about money. So you're absolutely right. I think it's fair to assume that the king is trying to deal with a lot of issues right now, primarily how to continue to function under such difficult circumstances, having, poisons pumped through your body to try to maintain some sort of quality of life. Sally, can I ask you about your Substack? You talk in the title, Everything's About Meghan. How interesting was it to write that article and really examine the last few weeks of Meghan's launches between a TV show, a podcast, and a lifestyle brand where you can buy her jams and her goodies? Also, this affiliate link launch that she did on social media, and watch her interviews where she says she's in her honeymoon phase. She's the happiest she's ever been, gleeful, talking about how Prince Harry and her are still dating on Drew Barrymore. The contrast of that versus Prince Harry on that BBC interview, I don't feel like these two, and I'm not talking about I'm not saying that there's problems in the marriage, but when it comes to what they're pursuing, it feels like these are two very different people that are not on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, she did in that interview that podcast interview she did before her, I guess it was her fourth. She was talking about how constantly busy she is. She's looking at QR codes for her products, and she's figuring out that she was talking a mile a minute, and she's on she's on a juggernaut, really. And whether things are working out or not, she kind of moves on to the next. She is like a shark who keeps moving forward. And and certainly with Love Meghan, you saw Harry, little glimpses of him sort of giggling in the background. And I came away with the feeling that he has become her accessory. And, there he was really at the beginning, and he was kind of the impetus for if you want to say, the Sussex startup. And now she has become the CEO, and he is somewhere along the line some sort of factotum, but that she's running the show, she's making the decisions, and he's following along. And it's sort of a demeaning position for him to be in. I don't know if he fully recognizes that. But it is fascinating to see how she's throwing everything against the wall. Sort of like Donald Trump is doing in a different way. But she's trying everything, and we don't know. I mean, we know that her podcast numbers have been diminishing. We knew that her With Love Meghan numbers diminished. We have no idea what's happening with As Ever, which is, to me, a really silly name for a brand. When I was in London last month, I went over to Fortnum and Mason and took a look at the display, the huge display for King Charles's Highgrove line. And he's a master merchandiser and marketer. And she, ironically, if she ever, she couldn't have done it in the royal family, but she could have learned a lot from him.
You're absolutely right. Also, his prices are so much better than hers. I'm like,
Yes.
you would expect that his prices would be higher because he's actual royalty, but here we are. Um,
And by the way, we also know where everything is made, and we
yes,
have no idea where her things are made, how many there are, how many were sold. I mean, there is no transparency.
amen. Yeah. Hugo, to Sally's point, I mean, when Harry's not opening Meghan Markle's car door for her, do we know what he does? I know they're very secretive, but it does feel like he should want us to think he's busy and working hard to provide for his family while he's asking the public to pay for his security, whether in the UK or I imagine the New Yorkers paid for a portion of Meghan's 4-car motorcade since it was provided by the NYPD a few weeks ago, twice, back to back. And also, do you have anything to say about the Senabale fallout? Because to me, these are two huge losses happening back to back for Prince Harry.
Yeah, well, the Bali thing is very unfortunate because that was one of the things that he was really good at, and he was very committed to that. And of course, it had a link back to his mother, and he was doing a really good job. So, heaven knows what was going on there. That's really sad. And if he loses Invictus Games, then he's lost everything that he was really trained to do. I mean, in the past, I've said, and I rather picked this up from others involved in this saga. One minute you're Captain General of the Royal Marines, and the next minute you're lying barefoot in the park under a tree in California. You can't really do both, and that's what it seems to be his life. And he's brought on, as Sally says, he's brought on at the end. He's brought on really just to make sure that we know that he knows it's happening. That's about all we can say. The fact that he sort of, I mean, I just watched the last episode or part of the last episode of the when she's sprinkling the petals on the salads. And he comes in at the very last minute and he grins for the camera. So we know that he knows she's doing it. That's about all you can say. And so she brings him in almost as the same thing happened in the Oprah Winfrey interview, by the way. He got brought in at the end so that we knew that he was aware it was taking place. I mean, nobody could accuse her of doing it behind his back. And that's about all you can say. He doesn't speak. There he is, like a fish. His mouth opens, he grins, and then he goes off camera, and she takes over again.
I have some gossip that I'm not sure I should share, but I'm going to share it because I love you too. The Senabale fallout, Prince Harry losing one of the most important charities to him, it has to be devastating. But it's my understanding that one of the charities that Meghan still works with in the UK is desperate to shake her off because they don't see the value in it. She cost them a fortune in promotional material because with her association with them, she wanted reshoots of pictures and they said absolutely not. If you want those, you have to pay for them yourself. It just seems like these two are more trouble than they're worth. And when you're pursuing a life of service, you try to be the absolute opposite of that. Sally, your objective is to enhance, to elevate the charities you're working with.
Well, I think we actually only have to look at the roster of the number of people who've left them. We know that she is exceedingly demanding and takes over, doesn't accept advice. So obviously, it is difficult to work for. I don't know how, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have any knowledge that particular charity wants to cut her loose, but she has, as we know, she has very low approval ratings in the UK, as does Harry, who used to be, I think, second only to the Queen. And it's the added value of Meghan with your charity has diminished.
That is so true. All right. Well, Hugo, Sally, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to me about. I know this is not the most fun subject, but we did see so much of the working royals this week. And what a blessing to see Prince Louis. Now I have more reason to envy Hugo. I didn't realize you actually met Prince Louis. You've met Prince Louis. You've read Prince Philip's letters. I just want to be you for a day, Hugo.
Well, be careful for what you wish.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. Agree with me.
Thank you, Kinsey.
Disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video and podcast with a friend. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you again next week.